Hello guys, this is UniversalGiant and welcome back for more of Shovel Knight. Today, in a special bonus episode, we're going to be taking on Challenge Mode, which we unlocked after beating Shovel Knight with Shovel Knight. Now, Challenge Mode has 26 different challenges for you. The first 10 are platformy-based challenges, and the remaining 16 are more difficult versions of all the different boss fights we've faced. And the 26 all appear to be cleared now because I didn't start recording until after I already tried the first 3 challenges to make sure of what we were in for. And you'll notice in most of these challenges there are a couple of interesting gimmicks. All of them require you to have very little health going through. You can see this is the one and only survival-based challenge, where you have to fend off a bunch of the propeller rats, and you only have your throwing anchor, 1 hit, well 2 hits technically, because these things only do half damage, and very limited use of the throwing anchor. So you have only a limited amount of and number of weapons that you can use, very little health, and oftentimes you have a time limit. So with this one I find you just use as much of your throwing anchor as you can to survive until you can grab one of the magic refills to either side. You should have just enough time to survive. And from here on, they're all purely platforming based. So this one you have to bounce off of the rocks, and the one tricky thing is a couple of them you'll have to bounce off of a second time when they go back towards the middle and off the wall. So like with this one over here, you bounce on the rock, knowing that it's going to go onto the spikes, you have to bounce back and then take that to leap up to the ladder. So a number of these challenges, you really have to know what you're doing going into it in order to be able to stand a chance. But going into this, and as you can probably tell, this is all post-commentated, I'll only be showing my successful attempts. But I wanted to try the first 3 challenges on my own to decide the best way to record this. I wasn't sure at the time if I wanted to do them live, or if I wanted to do them post-commentary, or what have you. And I originally decided to try doing them on my own first, and I figured the best way to do that would be to stream it. And thankfully nobody watched it! So nobody is spoiled by the content of this video. But the first 3 challenges I tried on my own to see exactly what we were in for, and I didn't have those recorded, so I went back and did them after I beat them. Now this part, you are able to damage boost if you hit yourself with a gear you can walk on the spikes for a short amount of time, and that's what I did when I first completed this level, but it's easy enough to do it without V-boosting. So I really do like the platforming challenges that they open up with here, and now you'll see me start going through these for the first time. But one thing I really like about going through these challenges, not only are they all completely unique relative to the game, and they make for very interesting gimmicks that we didn't see in the main game, but just about every one of these has a completely unique atmosphere. And we have so many different tile sets and music tracks to work with from the original game that it's nice that they actually took advantage of it. But you saw the last level that we went through, there was a gear gimmick. In this one, the gimmick is slowly riding up the bubbles that the mini-bosses from the first level fire from their mouths. And the trick with this one is making sure that you don't break all 3 of the bubbles in a group at the same time. A lot of times, my failed attempts were the result of popping more than 1 bubble at once, and you can tell how close together some of them are. It's pretty easy to do if you're not careful. But of course you can ride on the back of the little blue dragons, and you take all of the platforms that you can to serve towards your advantage here. But I really, really like the challenge mode. It's something that was only added in the second version of the game, which was released about a week before the first video, I think? Or after the first... I forget exactly what the timing was relative to when I uploaded, but this wasn't out when I started. And this was my first time reaching the jellyfish, so I didn't know if it was going to stay electrocuted or if it would let up at some point, so I jumped into it. But one thing I've gotten into the habit of doing throughout these challenges is if I do happen to fall off or take a hit, immediately down stab. Otherwise, you'll fall through whatever it is you're trying to land on. So always make sure you have your down stab ready in case you get hit. You never know what could happen. And that's what saved me in the last challenge. So like I said, I wound up recording a number of these over the stream because I wasn't sure if I wanted to re-record them later, because I knew how long it would probably take to get through these, and I don't have that much memory on my computer to save all those RAWs. So I wound up deciding to use the footage from that stream instead of re-recording them. And most of the time you won't notice the artifacts from the streaming, but this is one of those cases where you do, because there's so much going on the screen that the quality isn't all that great because of the bitrate. There's only so much I could do. But you can still have a good idea of what's going on. I really like the way that they use the books here to stop the lava from falling, and you have to be very careful with how you use the propeller dagger. This was a really interesting challenge stage. A lot of the stages, I really enjoyed the platforming challenges here. Some of them were incredibly difficult, and I think we're coming up on one that gave me the most trouble here, Extendo Retracto. I think this one took me between 10 and 15 minutes to get. The gimmick is you have all of those little platforms extending and retracting into the wall, as the name of the stage suggests. And for the most part, it's not all that bad. You're trying to use the phase locket to extend your jump, but that really only comes into play in one particular instance. For the most part, you can just platform through here normally. The trick is this part. Not only do you have to bounce off of the rock on the wall here like you did in the second one, but you have to use the phase locket at the top, otherwise you're going to fall right through that platform. And you only get one shot at making that jump. It's incredibly difficult. At least it is if you're playing on a keyboard, because you can only use so many buttons at a time. And this is my first time getting here. But even this one's not all that bad. You just have to use one phase locket at the end to make sure it doesn't crush you against the spikes, and you're done. That one jump where you have to use the phase locket at the peak after bouncing off that rock is what gave me the most trouble here. But I really like the next one too, Dragon Chase Race. It's based on Polar Night stage, and riding the little dragons around. So as opposed to the fourth challenge where we were doing a gentle auto-scroller going up, here, even though it's not an auto-scroller, it essentially plays like one. You just have to follow the little dragons along with you, and we'll have to bounce up and down between a couple of levels to make sure that we can pass by the platforms. So I make sure I get one last bounce off that dragon there, because I usually can't make it up to the platform on the same cycle that I break the block there. But eventually you have to move up to the top dragon in order to get through the platform over here. And then once you're off of here, you have to chase down the one on the bottom, because the one on the top won't give you room above. But I really like how the challenge stages help illustrate some of the different things that could be done with this game that weren't necessarily done in the main game. It really puts to the test all of the different skills that you've learned throughout Shovel Knight, and I feel I became a much better player at this game very quickly just by going through the challenge stages. They were a lot of fun. Now this one, even though you only have a very short amount of time, it took an incredible length of time for me to figure out what to do. All these little bird dudes are on a cycle, and the birds do half damage, the lava does full damage. The objective is to get all of the money in the stage. And really the best way to go through here is to memorize the pattern that the birders fly in. And if you strike them, that pattern is thrown off a bit, so everything I played up beyond the point where I struck that birder was completely by ear, because the timing was thrown off by the fact that I hit it. But the best way to go through here is to just memorize the path that these things take, know when you can move and when you can't. And learning that strategy took just about as long as it took me to beat Extendo Retracto, honestly. But I think this is the one that gave me the most trouble of all the platforming challenges. So this is a horizontal auto-scroller. And it's kind of funny that both of these are based on... the ones that gave me the most trouble are both based on Tinker Knight Stage. So this one reminds me a lot of the Lost World in Donkey Kong Country 2, where you had the rolling tires coming at you. But there are a number of tricky jumps you have to make. Like here, you'll want to try to get underneath the cog, but again, make sure you have your down stab ready. The spikes here, I think you're intended to ride along that thing 3 times, but you can barely make the jump over to the next platform off screen. It's a bit of a leap of faith, but it's something that I tried my very first time through and I never did anything differently. The upcoming jump here is deceivingly tricky. If you go when it's too far up, you'll jump right into the spikes, and if it's too far below, you'll miss the jump to the next platform. That one jump killed me more than anything. And the Medusa Head missiles are not as difficult to avoid as they look. You just have to remember how close you can get to them before they turn themselves around. And you can also bounce a pogo off of them. I can't believe I forgot to mention at some point throughout the Let's Play proper that the pogoing is almost certainly a throwback to DuckTales. I have no idea how I forgot to do that. But this stage probably took me the longest of any of the platforming challenges. I think that's more so because it's an auto-scroller and it takes a long time to get back to somewhere when you mess up. And the last one here, Unarmed Descent, you have to go through a gauntlet of enemies without being able to use an attack of any kind. So this one's got a bunch of ladder platforming. This particular room really isn't all that difficult. But you can see you only have 1/2 of a life, so you can't take a hit. The magic dude over there with the projectile that breaks, I try getting him to break that projectile early so I can get past him, and I'm waiting for timing with the gear dude to get past. I think I just barely make this one, and this is my first time in this room. So I take this room incredibly slowly, having absolutely no idea what's safe and what isn't. And in hindsight, if you notice the little blue shelves, those are supposed to indicate your safe zones. So the Griffin will always fire the fireballs in a sinusoidal pattern, and that pattern does not change. And the Ice Mage up top will always be dropping snowflakes in the exact same location. So if you're able to figure out where the safe zones are, you can get through here no problem at all. It's just a matter of working your timing around when these guys attack, so you can go when it's safe. But the safe zones are very clearly indicated on the screen, and that's one thing this game has been doing very, very well throughout, communicating just by the stage layout itself, rather than forcing you to try something you'd have no idea how to do. So I spend a lot of time in this room just trying to realize where all the safe zones are. But this is the last of the 10 platforming challenges, and I'm a bit disappointed because I really, really enjoyed these platforming challenges, and I wish that there were more of them. I believe Plague Knight also has his share of challenges, although I haven't looked into that myself. So those will be interesting to try out, but I do wish that Shovel Knight had some more because his control scheme is really solid. And I had a blast playing as Shovel Knight. So here it's just a matter of waiting for the Ice Mage's attack to finish, and I think I cut my movement to the ladder here incredibly close. I don't know how I didn't die there. But that does it for the 10 platforming challenges, and after this we just have a 16-stage boss gauntlet, essentially. And the boss challenges, similar to the platforming ones, you have very little amount of health and a very restricted choice of weapons, but you also have an incredibly short time limit. So you essentially have to beat King Knight with just your shovel in 30 seconds or less, which sounds difficult, but it's really not all that bad. And I think that a lot of these boss challenges are based on some of the techniques that speedrunners have been using for a while. And I've noticed just playing through some of these challenges and remembering back to some of the speedruns I've seen having to use very similar strategies in order to beat the time limit. And given the fact that Yacht Club includes the current world record in the credits, it's obvious that they're paying attention. So it felt really cool to be fighting all of these fights, similar to how the best players in the world have to fight them in order to be able to win. And you can see we have the propeller dagger here, which is not an item that we're able to get when we first face Spectre Knight. And it gives you a particular advantage against flying enemies that we'll see later on in the fight. But the one thing that kept killing me in Spectre Knight's fight that I think a lot of new players struggle with is when he throws his scythe, the safest place is usually not to move at all. But you can use the propeller dagger to repeatedly dash in the air and do massive amounts of damage to Spectre Knight when he's standing still. So I usually wait until he's in the middle of an attack animation, like if he's summoning enemies or making it dark. The propeller dagger makes quick work of a guy. And being forced to play through all of these rematch challenges really helps you get familiar with the boss patterns. Except Plague Knight! He's just as much of a jerk as always. And I think he's the one that gives me the most trouble now that I'm more familiar with all the boss patterns, simply because Plague Knight doesn't necessarily have a pattern, he's just a random piece of crap. Bouncing all over the place, teleporting, doing any number of random attacks. And I try to save my phase locket towards the end of the fight, because that's when his attacks start to get a little more tricky. But even then, it's usually just to stop for a second, see what he's doing, assess the situation, and then figure out what to do. But if I'm able to get him to sit in a certain spot for more than a second, and get a couple of good hits on him, it makes him a bit easier to deal with. But even after that, I still don't know if I have a decent way of dealing with Plague Knight. So next up we have Treasure Knight, and this one is one of the ones that I had the most trouble with because of the time limit. You can see I really enjoy using the chain pogo attacks against these guys, but because we're underwater, that's a very slow way of getting consistent attacks in against Treasure Knight. But we also have the ability to jump higher, so you need to use that to your advantage as well. And here I think I get incredibly lucky being able to dodge that spike, otherwise it would have killed me. And because I was able to dodge it, he just stood there on the side like an idiot, and I was able to get a couple of pogos in. But you can see, even after all that, I only had 3 seconds left. The time limit in all of these fights is just incredibly difficult to overcome, especially against Mole Knight. So here you absolutely need to take advantage of the charge attack that they give you, otherwise you will not be able to beat this guy in time. So you want to get as many hits in on him as possible before he goes into the ground here, because once he comes up from the ground after this attack, he turns invincible for several seconds and you almost have no chance of beating him. So even though it looks like I have 8 seconds left, you only have maybe 1 or 2 seconds after that when he's vulnerable, so you have to be very quick. And this Tinker Knight challenge is the one place throughout the entire game where I learn what the coin does, because I don't think I ever actually used it in the game proper. So the coin just runs along the floor and it bounces off of enemies until it disappears off the side of the screen. So I just use it as a means of getting an extra hit on him, and in the first phase of this fight, I realized that it's really easiest to just stick to ground-based attacks, because he moves around way too much to get any pogo chains going. And then when you face off against the big guy, it's all about being able to stay on top of his machine, so you can continue getting that pogo chain going. So once you get up onto his drill and you start bouncing off of his head, you have to do whatever you can to stay up there. Now, if you remember from the original game, we have to make sure that we stay to the left side and try to follow him as he charges into the wall. Because if you go over the spiked shoulder on the machine's left side, you'll fall right back down to the floor, and chances are you won't have any time to get back up. Because you can see we only have 9 seconds left, and we didn't fall down once during that. So it's incredibly difficult to beat him if you don't stay on top of him through the entire fight. But you can see, even though we're running out of Order of No Quarter battles, we still have 10 left, and that's because we have all of the Wandering Travelers to beat as well. So thankfully against Propeller Knight they gave us the throwing anchors to use because he'll be in the air a decent length of time, and I guess they didn't want us to have nothing to do to beat him with. So get as many stabs as you can while he's on the ground, get some throwing anchors off here. I don't know what the optimal strategies are because I only beat this with what I was able to do myself, but I think because of the time restraints, I've probably found something that's close to the fastest, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to clear them. So I'm interested to see what the records are for some of these challenges, but I have a feeling they are not going to be not all that faster. But here's the one fight that gave me the most trouble because I was able to cheese it so easily with the phase locket in the original game. That's Polar Knight! So you'll see I'm wasting my Flare Wand in the beginning because he tends to jump around at random in the second half of the fight, and I just wanted to get as many consistent hits on him as possible. And here, I tend, almost out of necessity, to make use out of invincibility frames after getting hit, so I don't get hit by spikes. But I think Polar Knight's the one that gave me the most trouble of all of them, because I really didn't have to fight him legitimately in the main game. So now we're on to the extra fights, starting with Black Knight. And this isn't the first or second fight with him, this is the one where we faced him at the entrance of the Tower of Fate. So you find the one issue with this guy is, a decent length of time, he's not actually vulnerable to attacks. So you have to try to get a couple of good pogo chains in on him when he's in his flying state. At least I found that's the most consistent way to beat him. If you can get on top of him like this when he starts doing an attack, you can get a lot of hits in without really have to put in any effort. So I got really lucky with the attack pattern that he gave me in this part, but most of the other attempts I had, he did a number of different attacks that left him only vulnerable for maybe half the fight or less, and it was incredibly difficult to get the hits in I needed within that span of time. And Rize, now that we're given the Chaos Spheres to work with, they do wonders against her when she's on the ground. And I keep calling Rize a sheep, but I'm not actually sure. This is the only challenge I believe I was able to beat on my very first attempt. Chaos Spheres are just so useful against this guy. But I really love the design of Rize as well. Kind of wish it was a little bit more difficult, just so we could fight a little more frequently than we did. But I'm okay with that. Next up we have the Baz. Now, for whatever reason, in this fight, and this fight only, it doesn't say there are any restrictions on the attacks that you can do, but for whatever reason, I was not able to swing my shovel normally. I couldn't do any horizontal attacks with it, I could only pogo. And I don't think that's supposed to be a restriction on this fight, so you'll see I'm using the Flare Wand as opposed to just swinging my shovel normally. It's not because I don't want to swing my shovel normally, I don't have the ability to. And I don't know if that was intended or not. But either way, the Baz isn't all that difficult if you keep your distance in the second phase. And next up is the fan favorite Mr. Hat. So here's another guy I beat up without really learning what he did. He has two different hats as far as I can tell. One lets him throw those swords up into the air and he does some melee attacks close up. And then the other one, he puts on his red, he throws a bunch of projectiles, and if you're lucky, you can get on top of him when he rises up to the ceiling and you can get a really nice pogo chain on him. So I had a lot of trouble beating him without getting that chain. But it also left a lot of time at the end, so I had to figure that it would have been easy enough to do without it. And Phantom Striker was a lot easier than I thought he was my first time. As long as you're able to stay on top of him and stay slightly off-center, so when he draws in the lightning bolt above him, you don't get struck by it, there's very little he can really do. The most helpful thing for me is if I happen to hit the ground, immediately jump in pogo. If you're lucky, you'll be able to get a strike on him as you're coming up before he can swing his weapon at you. So he turned out to be a lot easier than I remembered him being. But the one boss that gave me the most trouble was this guy from the Hall of Champions, the big creep. Because you remember, you can only hit him with the projectiles that come off of the orbs when you strike the orbs. And the one trick with this battle is the creep spends so much time within a wall at the very top of the screen where you can just barely reach him if you're lucky. It's incredibly annoying. A number of times I got him down to maybe one hit left with 10-15 seconds to go, and I was not able to reach him at all. It was so frustrating. So it's just a matter of keeping both of these orbs together if you can, and again, one instance of him being all the way at the top and I just barely had enough time to reach him even though I had a full 15 seconds. If he didn't stop in the center of the screen at the top there, I would have lost that one too. So this one takes a lot of patience. But now we're down to two, the Enchantress and the Remnant of Fate. Now I think from a fight difficulty standpoint, the Enchantress fight here was the most difficult for me, because you only have 2 health, and you have to fight her. I guess you have throwing anchors, but they're not as much help as you would think they would be. So just like the other ones, if you can get on top of them and get a consistent pogo going, that's probably the fastest way you can attack. It also helps to return her projectiles as well. But when she's down here, I found it difficult to track her with the throwing anchors, and that might just be me. So I just waited until she came up with maybe 20 seconds, 15 seconds to go, and then I would start getting more consistent throwing anchor shots on her. But again, if you're able to get on top of her with a pogo, it's probably the most efficient way of doing damage. It's just that you only have 2 health. So health is just as much of a factor here as the time limit. And last but not least is the one that probably made me feel like more of a badass than all of the other ones, is that you can use the same propeller dagger strategy we used on Spectre Knight against the final boss. And I think this is also the strategy that speedrunners use to beat the bosses. So the idea is you get 3 hits before she moves, and then if you know what direction she goes, you can just spam the propeller dagger in that direction, and there's not much she can do about it. So you're able to beat her incredibly quickly. That was probably the most satisfying boss fight I had throughout all of the challenges here. And that does it for all 26 challenges. I don't know if you were supposed to get an achievement for something for beating all of those. I didn't, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, this is UniversalGiant, and this has been Shovel Knight's Challenge Mode. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.